I've learned a lot about myself because I've
Yeah.
learned that, yeah, like you can make a living doing what you love because that's the best way that you're going to be productive. But I do believe now that a lot of our skill comes from what we love to do because it's innate in us and it's natural. 100% agree. And I
Mm.
do think that alignment is something within you that you have to realize or believe in and ultimately experience. But I also believe that alignment comes from those who you surround yourself with. But I didn't realize at the time how much pressure I was putting on myself and
Mm.
how much stress I wasn't managing because I thought if I felt busy or if I felt any way of stress, that was just the nature of the business I was in. When something happens to you physically or even really emotionally or mentally, I felt a lot of shame.
Yeah.
I felt a lot of shame in what happened because I couldn't explain it to people
Yeah.
because whatever happens right now is going to be a life lesson to, pass along in the future. So I never take bad experiences as a bad experience. They really are just something that can help us and further our message forward. I think though, I after my heart attack, I learned to say no simply out of necessity.
Well, welcome back to the show, everybody. I have an amazing guest today, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her. As soon as I saw her picture, I just knew energetically that she was somebody that I wanted to get to know more. And I wanted to tell her story. I could tell that she was a hard charger like me, but she also had the other side. She had a balanced, grounded side to her. And I was so curious, did something happen? Were you always that way? Kerrie Lee Brown is here, and she is a respected magazine editor, author, speaker, and women's health advocate. She is published in over 150 magazines worldwide and has held numerous senior editorial roles across North America. She is the VP, Media, and Editor in Chief at Success Magazine, the publisher of Red Lily Lifestyle Brand, and the founder of Red Lily Media. Although a sought after media executive and always on the go, Kerrie Lee stays grounded as a proud mom of two boys. Kerrie Lee, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is my pleasure. I know your life is so busy. You
Yeah,
are you are a one popular lady. So thank you so much for making the time for being here.
absolutely. My pleasure.
Can you just help us understand a little bit more about like who is Kerrie Lee? How did you grow up? Where did you grow up? What was your family life like?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, honestly, I love to share this story because a lot of people don't know that I'm actually Canadian. So I'm from Toronto. I grew up in Toronto. And then I moved to the US here only 10 years ago. So I live in Denver, Colorado now. But man, when you think about my childhood, I had a happy childhood, one sister and my parents. My parents are both from overseas. My dad's from Ireland, my mom's from Wales. So I have
Wow.
I have that connection to Europe and traveled over there every year as a child to see relatives. I still go over there quite a bit. But I love to think that I've always had that kind of international flair about me, even
Yeah.
from like a baby. I was always kind of jet setting. But yeah, I mean, that's where I grew up. I've worked in media now and publishing for 3 decades, which I know really dates me. I know it's crazy, but it doesn't seem like that, to be honest. It doesn't seem like 30 years, but it has been. And so many different, experiences in the media world and everything where I've come from. But yeah, and that's where I grew up, like very happily. And, in the suburbs of Toronto, majority of my career, like when I started, was commuting into the city
Mm.
and, landing those magazine jobs. I went to university originally to be a lawyer, which is something that some people don't know. I wanted to go into law. Like originally, I also majored in political science and international foreign relations. And that was a very interesting degree for me. Then I got introduced to communications and media studies. And that's kind of where I fell in love with the art of storytelling and being able to share people's stories. And so then I did my master's in journalism. And that's kind of how it all flowed as to where I started my career in Toronto. So that's the basis of kind of my upbringing and where I'm from. And then I graduated, of course, started my career and kind of worked my way up, really, just like you said. Like I'm a driven person. I
Yeah.
always have been. When I look back now, even on my high school years and that, I was always, trying to be the valedictorian or, kind of those kind of things. And I don't know why. It was ingrained in me as a child growing up to be like an independent, strong person and
Mm,
never to, rely on anyone. So I think that even at a young age, always kind of was ingrained in me. And it's something I try to ingrain now in my children as well. And my boys now are 15 and they're 20. So I'm at that
mm.
pivotal moment where I'm trying to make a great impression on them as to how to, not only respect women and women in business, but also their mom and see how hardworking she is so I can set a good example. So yeah, it's a great place to be right now for sure.
Did your mom work outside the home?
She did. She
Okay.
did. She actually, funny enough, one of her first jobs after emigrating to Toronto, Canada, after my parents were married. So they were married when they emigrated. And one of her first jobs was at a publishing house, which is very interesting. She worked in the administrative executive side. However, it was interesting because who knew that I would go on to not only publish a book and also work in that publishing world of media and at magazines. So that's kind of interesting. And then she ended up like she's passed now, but she
Mhm.
also her last several years she retired from the town that we lived in, which is the town of Milton in the city hall. And she
Oh,
worked as a revenue clerk there. So yeah, my mom was very goal oriented too, but she was also a great homemaker and she didn't have big aspirations to become a C-suite executive,
yeah.
but she had always worked, always set a great example for her two girls, which I'm really proud of as well. So
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for
yeah.
sharing that. So, being independent, was that something that was taught to you, or was it caught? Like, did you learn it by watching your mom, or were there ever conversations about that you need to provide for yourself and be
Yeah, you know what?
independent?
Having it was just my sister and I, right? We're 3 years apart. We were
Yeah,
always kind of I think it's both. I think it was taught and caught, and I love
yeah.
that. Like that's a great way to frame it because it was taught from a young age never to really depend on anyone else. Like just, always it's great to depend on someone when you have a healthy relationship and you have to, right? It has to be mutual.
Hmm.
But I was always taught to not have to depend on finding that relationship to be dependent on someone. Like if it happened and it happened naturally, wonderful. Probably the reason why I didn't even really want to necessarily get married for years. I wasn't one of these women or these girls who kind of dreamed of a white wedding and growing up and getting married and having children and all that. Now, ultimately, I did do that, but it
Hmm.
wasn't something that was top of mind growing up. My goal was to become an executive, to become a media
Hmm.
executive, to run a big magazine in New York City and have a penthouse and, live in Manhattan. That's where I wanted to be. And funny, I did that in many different ways. And I didn't end up moving to New York, but I did that in other ways. And I think that was just always my thing. I always felt like I put a lot of pressure on myself growing
Yeah,
up and
yeah.
trying to get those great opportunities. But because something inside of me always drove me to want more for myself so I could feel gratified. Some people may say that I, never satisfied kind of thing, but at the same time, I felt like it was a different way. I think it was a positive way of growing up because my parents pushed me to be competitive, but competitive not only with other people but within myself. And I
Hmm.
think that was really important because then I learned to become independent. I also learned to go through the ups and downs and setbacks of
Hmm.
climbing the corporate ladder and be able to accept those and move through them on my own, where I didn't like depend on anyone else to have to push me through that. Now, granted, I obviously needed, guidance and mentorship along the way. And I found those people in my circles. But I do feel like when I look back now, it was a huge part of my growing up to learn to stand on my own 2 feet and
Yeah.
to learn from those setbacks and those life lessons. I brought them into today's world as well. So,
Yeah, I love that.
mhm.
What I'm hearing from you is that the responsibility was on you for your happiness and for your success. Right?
Mhm.
Like
Absolutely.
it wasn't on somebody else. It wasn't when I get married or when I get this job. Of course, you put immense pressure on yourself. But
Mhm.
what I'm hearing from you, and if you could tell me if I'm hearing correctly or not, is that it was like, okay, you come back to the drawing board and go, okay, well, what do I need to do here, right? Like, how do I need to get
Yeah.
better? What do I want right now?
Yeah. And how,
And
and
even
I
with
mean,
your career choice or
yes,
your change of trajectory in college, because you
exactly.
realized that you didn't want to do what you were going to school for, and you got your master's in something different. Which, by the way, same here, pre
Yeah.
med and then MBA.
See, there you
Yeah,
go. And it's
yeah.
funny because maybe that was again, caught in maybe my circles or the way my parents raised me, or maybe it was just always ingrained in me and like kind of more of a DNA thing.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
I've got a load of entrepreneurs and professional athletes in both sides of my family. I don't know. Maybe it's in my DNA, but I do feel like there was always that drive to do great things. And
Mhm.
whether that's what you think success is, it wasn't necessarily making loads of money. It was more about the impact and the way I could impact people's lives. I felt that
I love
from
that.
young, like in
Yeah.
university, I always knew. And that's why when I changed to go into journalism or into magazine, reporting and journalism at that age, I knew I could help people share their stories. And
Mm.
that was way back in the day before storytelling as a term was kind of a thing. It was more that I knew I could help give people a voice if I could interview them about their story or whatever they're going through and get it published, because then it would go out to a larger audience. And it's so funny because when I look at my career and where it's gone and all the different kind of avenues and everything and where I've excelled and where I've had like obstacles to overcome, I look at it now and I still have that main goal. It's to help people, and it's really to help people share their voice.
Yeah.
Now I'm at a different stage. I'm at a different platform. I have different networks, of course, because you do that naturally throughout a career and as you age. But I do feel like that's still the part of me that I really want to excel at even more so moving forward.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Yeah. How it's all kind of come to be.
If you're like most overachievers, you're probably already thinking about 2025 and how you're going to level up even more, unleash your full potential, and reach your goals. Well, don't worry, I got you covered. I've gathered some of the most successful people in the world in both life and business who also happen to be my friends. Bradley, Ben Newman, Emily Ford, Amberly Lago, myself, and 15 other experts are ready to pour into you as you launch into 2025 stronger than ever. Join us for a free 4-day online event where we will share proven systems and skills to elevate your mindset, drive action, and unleash your full potential. Go to www.successunleashedsummit.com to register. Link is in the show notes. I'll see you there. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're very in tune with who you are.
Hmm. Well,
And
it's a nice thing to feel that, because I think in your 20s you don't know who you are, and you
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
you think but you kind of don't, and then you're trying to like prove to yourself, to others around you, of who you think you are. But I think nowadays, when we look back at our lives and where we've come from, and how we've grown, how we've had setbacks, but then
Mhm.
overcome them and gone through them. I think now I always maybe deep down did know who I was. I was just
Yeah,
trying to really find that spot where I could excel at it and maybe believe it, if you
yeah.
will. Like
Yep.
maybe believe who I always was, or was who I was meant to be. Now I'm at that stage, I'm 51 now. I'm now at that stage, a new chapter where I do believe and I know who I am.
Mhm.
And I try to bring that out in other women as well who I speak to. But I also, it's still there's still an end game. Like I still have to improve every day. I still have to
Yeah,
work on myself.
yeah.
That's where the self-care comes in. That's where the making myself a priority comes in, especially as a media executive with really hectic days, and a
Mhm.
team that's wonderful, but and works all over the world. I mean, it's extremely hectic, but I have to think about myself. I have to think about my boys and what ultimately is going to make me happy. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
one of the questions I always ask people in my interviews with people for the magazine, and what I do is, what someone's definition of success is. And I think about it a lot myself now. I think
yeah,
about what I think it is. And to me, it's a feeling.
yeah,
Success to me
yeah,
is now a feeling. It's
yep,
what's in your heart. It's what
yeah,
makes you feel, that warmth. Are you helping people? Are your kids happy? Are they healthy? Are you in a good spot to be able to make a difference in even strangers' lives? That to me is a definition of success. And that's where I really want to start to excel again now moving into the new year.
yeah. That's so beautifully said, and it's something that you can't like. Nobody can put that in you because that
Right.
feeling, and but once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. So
That's
you
it.
know the things that you do that make you feel that way. So
Uh-huh.
really, just like being self aware and paying attention to your body and knowing like, okay, that I need to do more of that. That makes me feel really good. But before
Yeah.
we dive into your career a little bit, you said something that I believe is we need to stop for just a second for other people to hear. And what you said is that the belief, the belief
Hmm.
that what you're feeling or what you're doing is the right thing. And I personally, from working with thousands of women I feel like that's what we're all searching for, including myself. Is this the right angle? Is this the right thing? Is this the right? Is this enough? Is this going to be enough? Can I land here?
Yeah.
But you're walking living proof that you can make a career out of what makes you feel good, and it's storytelling, and you've known that for 3 decades. Whether you've known it
Yeah.
or not, that's kind of what's happened here.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because even moving into my career at Success, it's like we obviously highlight entrepreneurs and people in business and their passion projects and everything. And I've learned a lot from even interviewing a lot of experts and thought leaders in this space. I've learned a lot about myself because I've
Yeah.
learned that, yeah, like you can make a living doing what you love because that's the best way that you're going to be productive
Yeah.
and you're going to be dedicated to your clients or your audience or your customer because you believe in yourself and your ability to do that, doing something you love. And maybe again, that comes with maturity. Maybe
Yeah.
that comes with experience of working in this industry for 30 years, but it really is, focusing on what you love to do and giving back. It's so funny, life has changed. We both
Yeah.
have degrees and masters and that, and a lot of people kind of grow up thinking I got to go to college, I got to educate and then go on to get my experience, and that's still wonderful. But I do believe now that a lot of our skill comes from what we love to do because it's innate in us and it's natural.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that, again, the storytelling aspect and sharing other people's stories, and then eventually throughout my life, sharing my own story that has impacted people, that is something that I feel is so beneficial now, moving into my 50s, that
Yeah.
is people are coming to me asking me to mentor them in how to share their story. It's like, well, that to me is a very natural thing.
Yeah.
So I love that. I think
Yeah.
it takes the pressure off us saying, well, I have this skill and this skill and this skill. Things have even changed with like social media and online business because now anybody can be a writer, right? Anybody can be a coach. Anybody can be a graphic designer out there with all the tools that are available. So when you really, really kind of peel back the layers of the onion, you don't necessarily have to become an expert in those tools via like traditional kind of tools like skill building. It's what it's ingrained in you and what you feel most natural doing, and
Yeah.
that's what's going to set you apart. And that's why storytelling to me is just a natural evolution of where I've been going with my mentoring and my training, is
Mhm.
because I feel like that is just something I love to do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
you don't work a day in your life if that's
Right.
what you do, right? And that feeling that you say that you're looking for, you get to feel it all day long because you're
Absolutely.
doing what you
Absolutely.
love. And what I find, I have a course for women called Becoming Unstoppable in Life and Business, and the thing that I find that blew me away, Carrie, is
Mhm.
that there's not many people that are in alignment, that are
Okay.
100%, that are even close. I mean, I'm finding like 5% of women that I work with are living in alignment, and I was that person, and I think I'm a lot closer. I don't know if I'm all the way there, but I'm a lot closer, and it's interesting to see what happens in people and the stress that they don't even know that they're feeling, this
Yep.
internal friction because they're pushing for all the things that they think that they need to do. But if you could just settle in and trust that the things
Mhm.
that you love to do, you can find a way right here, right here.
100% agree. And I
Yeah.
do think that alignment is something within you that you have to realize or believe in and ultimately experience. But I also believe that alignment comes from those who you surround yourself with.
Oh,
And I
1,000%. Yeah.
And I think that's again where I am in my life. It's my age, my maturity, my experience being a mother, being, in the media world. It's something that I've come to realize that is so important. So to have the right people around you, and we spoke about this earlier, is to have those people with the same ideals and values, whether that's in your professional
Mhm.
life or even your personal life. You get to a stage, where you just realize that those are the people you want to be around.
Yeah.
And I think by osmosis, if you're around like minded people, that's really generally where you start to excel. And where
Mhm.
you might even, because people might say, well, how do I know that if, I love doing this, but how can I make a living out of it? Or how do I know that people are going to respect me as a legitimate business person if I'm just doing my passion, right? Because passions are so personal.
Yeah.
and things you love to do. But if you believe in it, and then the other people, the people around you believe in you as well and keep, pushing you up and helping you rise throughout the ashes, if you will, then you do know that that is your right trajectory. And I think that's what's exactly happened to me.
Yeah.
I think that that is one of those things, like when people come to me and say, I just love hearing you talk about your heart health story. And
Mm.
I love to hear how you rose out of those turmoil kind of years of figuring out how something so traumatic can happen to you, how you overcome that. Well, my physical, issues was something that I never thought would ever come, but it did. And then now I've been able to turn that into a message where I'm now influencing other people to look after their own health. So I think it is a natural evolution and something that I love to talk about. And I'm so glad we're speaking about this because I like to help people, encourage them to think that, you know, everything that happens in their life can become something they can help other people with. And
Yeah.
I think that's just so important to me nowadays.
Yeah, it so is. And
Mhm.
all you need is one person too. Right? So if
Yes.
you think about your circle and knowing that I'm not around the right people, they're not lifting me up, they're not
Yeah.
thinking bigger, they're not supporting, all you need is one person that you
It's
can
all
talk to.
it's all
And I'll
that's
tell
right.
you that, when I knew I needed to leave corporate America and I did a Tony Robbins event and he talked about cleaning up the people that you were hanging around. And I'm looking around, I was new in Charlotte. I had just gone through a divorce and I was having a lot of fun. And I was like, oh, I got to do some cleaning up. Like, this is fun, but I know this is okay. I'm listening, but I was like, okay, I'm in a new city
Yep.
and here's where I'm going. And I didn't have those people. So, I turned a podcast into books and those people became my friends. A lot of them I don't even know today. But at
Yeah.
the time when I was leaving corporate America, it was me and my bathtub and Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability just
Yes.
went viral. I listened to that talk because nobody understood why I wanted to leave corporate America. Nobody in and the more I listened to them, the more I got away from myself and the more confused I got and the more friction. But it was me and Brene Brown. And so now, of course, my circle is full of people like you. And so
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to make some of these decisions. But let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about so you were climbing the ranks, you did all the things that you wanted to do and then something happened in your life that you weren't expecting that really changed the trajectory of where you're going and also the way that you were thinking and taking care of yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, I had already been working in my career and kind of like climbing up the corporate ladder, if you will, in
Yeah.
Toronto. And um, I knew that working in the field that I work in, which is media and being a public figure and being out there sharing the news, if you will, whether you work in magazines or on the news or, whatever, it's still a public forum. And I knew
Mm,
that there was always pressure on me, right, to maybe not to be, but to appear perfect, to
mm.
be that person that if you're a spokesperson for a national or an international magazine and you're the editor in chief or the executive editor, people come to you and they know that what advice you're giving, the people you're profiling in the magazine, there's a lot of pressure in that.
And a lot of these were health and wellness
And
magazines, right?
yeah, so
Yeah.
back in the day, yeah, I can mention that is that my career started in the health and fitness industry,
Mm,
and I worked in it for years, like up almost 15 years, 20 years in that space, and I was around all these people who appeared perfect, like even
mm,
physically. Right? Like
mm.
I'm the former editor in chief of Oxygen Women's Fitness. And I loved my time there. I helped build that brand. I turned it around. I was at the forefront of giving Oxygen a new voice, even at the stage of websites and internet coming into play. Like it was a whole big like time in that field, really, for changing the way publishing is. And I remember, like, I was putting these models on our covers, and I was basing it all off of their looks or off of how well
Mm,
they did at fitness competitions because that was the nature of our magazine, right?
mm,
It really
mm.
was. And there was a lot of pressure in that. People would come to me and say, how do I get on the cover? How do I do this? All this type of thing. And I had a lot of, I would hate to say power because I'm not saying that from an ego place, a
Yeah.
place of ego. I mean that my role has always had this ability
Mm,
to make or break careers. And I
mm,
knew that was a lot of pressure. And I had that pressure on me. I also had the pressure to keep, it's a very competitive industry, media,
mm.
and it was extremely competitive. I knew I was kind of on top of my game, but in any field, really, you meet those competitors and they're like, doing things to get where they can to get ahead. And you start to have this imposter syndrome. So I
Mm.
remember at the time, and I'll tell you about what happened, which really changed my way of thinking and my mindset about not only personal, but also professional aspirations. I was the executive editor at a parenting magazine. I had left the fitness and health industry to move into the parenting industry, which was it was a national magazine called Today's Parent at Rogers Media in Toronto, the largest parenting magazine. And I had a lot of, a lot of big kind of opportunities there. I did collaborations with big corporate sponsors like Kellogg's and all
Wow.
these different ones. And I was on TV every week as well as the
Mm.
editor talking about our content. And it was a really exciting job. I loved what I did. I was a young mom at the time. So it made sense that I had moved into this space. But I didn't realize at the time how much pressure I was putting on myself
Mm.
and how much stress I wasn't managing, because I thought if I felt busy or if I felt any way of stress, that was just the nature of the business I was in. That was just because I was a high profile magazine journalist who was on
Yeah.
TV and who had editorials in
It's
every
part of the
issue.
gig, right? You're
It was
doing it
part of the
right. You're
gig.
doing it
And I
right.
thought,
Yep.
that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
In our careers when you
Yeah.
get to a certain point. So, long story short, I was also commuting into the city 4 hours each way, or 4 hours a day, sorry, each
Wow.
day. It was crazy. And that's all, again, nature of working in a big city in Toronto, living in the suburbs. So, one night I was
But
putting
you
my
grew up that way, right? Commuting in the city, or your parents did? Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did, and that's the thing, like, it was just, like, the way it
Part of it.
was,
Yeah.
right? So and, I mean, I didn't realize what was happening to me physically. So one evening, to make a long story short, I was putting my kids to bed, and I got such a sharp, sharp pain in my shoulder out of the blue. Like, it felt like someone with a baseball bat had hit me out of the blue, and it was, like, so crazy. I was like,
Mm.
"What was that?" Did not realize what was going on,
Did
and
it
it
like
turned
come and go, or did it?
it
Yeah.
it kinda lingered, like, it was almost like somebody hit me, and then it kinda stung, and it kind of, like, sorta went down my arm and
What
then into my
shoulder?
back, but this is the funny thing, it was my right.
Mm.
See? And this is where I doubted what was happening. It turned out, and I'll tell you all the what happened. Turned out I had a heart attack, and I did not realize at the time. I was 39 at the time. I was
Mm.
healthy. I wasn't overweight. I was busy and stressed, yes, but I did not think that anything could happen like that. And as women, we don't, right? We always
Mm.
think, even if we know it could be something, we still kind of set it aside because we have other things to do. I was putting the kids to bed. I had an early morning, an early commute into the office the next day. I was like, I don't have time for this. But I couldn't believe the exhaustion. I mean, literally, physically, the exhaustion that hit me after the hit. Just a wave of exhaustion came over my body. And I went right downstairs to my husband and I said, oh my gosh, I have to go to bed. Like, it was almost like I was about to faint, but I knew I had my wits about me. But I
Mhm.
felt the pain going through to my neck and my back, my lower back, but I still never chalked it up to anything to do with my heart. I really
Mhm.
didn't. I just thought,
Mhm.
okay, this is the universe's way of saying I need to slow down and I just need to go to bed early. I'll be fine tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, long story short, my husband said, let's call an ambulance. I was that bad. And I said, no. And I said no. And this is the crazy part of my story. I am so, so fortunate, so, so fortunate that it worked out the way it did. There's tons of different levels of heart attacks. We all
Yeah.
know that. I
Yeah.
was extremely fortunate. I went to bed, didn't sleep a night. I was in a lot of pain, Googling my symptoms all night long, which probably didn't even help. But as women, that's what we do.
Did
We
heart
just
attack come up at all?
it did, but I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Talk about
Mhm.
belief, right?
Yeah.
Did not
Yeah.
believe it. There's no way. How could it be? It just wasn't the signs and symptoms that I typically knew were of a heart attack,
Mhm.
which I have since learned that those typical signs that and symptoms that we hear about, that it's your left arm, that it's like, oh my God, like it's going, that are typical signs and symptoms for men, which I didn't realize aren't the symptoms are not the same for women in heart attacks.
Mhm.
And that was the thing. You can have a sign and symptom of that feels like indigestion or like from food, that can be a sign of a heart attack.
Mhm.
I had no idea, no idea. So I'll tell you what I did. I went to work the next day. I still felt uneasy. I had a horrible headache. I felt weird. I had this pain in my back that was so bizarre. But I went. And you know what happened? I had a panic attack at work that day. I knew something was completely off, but I
Did you
didn't
have
know
panic
what it was.
attacks before? Was that like a normal
I
cycle?
hadn't, no.
Okay.
And it was very interesting because I had never experienced a panic attack.
Yeah.
So I then did, and the sweats and the feeling of the flight or flight, I really didn't know what was going on, but I definitely knew something was wrong.
Mhm.
So I went home, I spoke to my mom, and she was like, "You have to go to the hospital. Like, this is not right." I kept saying, "You know what, mom? It's just stress. It's stress." Like, obviously, I knew something was going on, but I had no idea that it was a heart attack. I had no idea that there was something actually physically going on with my heart. I eventually went to the hospital. I eventually had all the all the tests done. I started to see a cardiologist, ended up having cardiac surgery because it was a heart attack, and also ended up learning that at age 39, I had a heart defect from birth that I didn't know about. And what was happening was it was getting worse over time, but with the
Mm.
added stress and then the electrical issue I had since birth, it was all adding up. And I did not realize, and this is one of the big things I like to tell people, I did not realize also the mental and the emotional stress I was under at the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
added up. So it was
Yeah.
such a wake up call that physically I was impacted by things that were happening emotionally and mentally. And I didn't even fathom before that could even be a thing.
Yep.
I had no idea. I
Yep.
thought you only had heart attacks if you were, unfortunately unhealthy or were overweight or were a smoker or it ran in your family. And I had no idea. So after that, it changed my life. So back to your original question, it changed my trajectory
Yeah.
because not only from a personal way and like looking after myself and how I thought my mindset, but also the way I looked at my profession, how I looked at the stresses in my life, and how I looked at everything else that went along with it.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
that you have no residual. You don't have you're okay, right?
I've got a
Nothing
clean bill of
residual.
health now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
after all that happened, I saw my cardiologist for another year or so after that, like regularly, and he gave me a clean bill of health. I still have high blood pressure. That's something that, I'm trying to deal with,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm definitely better now. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, I just am so appreciative that you share your story now because being in the healthcare world for almost 2 decades myself before I left corporate America, I was very close to the world of cardiac surgery, cardiology, and most people don't realize that for women, it is the number one cause of death. Like cardiac incidents, cardiac disease, that's the number one incidence. And so, as women who, I don't have children, but I work with a lot of women that have children,
Hmm.
there's so much guilt that they put on themselves and
Yes.
they always seem to be the last person. So I know I do it myself sometimes with career and this person's more important and I need to go do a good job for that person, but then you stack partner on top of that, then you stack daughter on top of that, and for you you have these two boys. So,
Yeah.
did you change anything in your life? Like after this happened, and I know that you see the world a little differently
Yes.
now, but do you change? Like, is there anything different about the way you go about your day? Did you change careers? Like how do you make sure that you're okay?
Well, lots of changes happened, and I think a lot of them happened, maybe it was the way of the universe telling me that change had to happen.
Yeah,
But I started seeing a naturopath. I
yeah,
started really digging into my nutrition and looking at what I was putting in my body, even though at the time I didn't think I ate that badly, but there's always room for improvement. I
hmm,
started looking at natural supplements. I started doing all those type of things and implementing a lot more mind body work, like meditating. So instead, I'll tell you one thing, I used to commute on the train in and out. And during that time, I used to think, oh, well, I'm on the train for an hour. So I have a lot of time to myself. I'm going to just check my emails and I'm going to get caught up on my emails because nobody's bothering me. I'm going to do that. But what I didn't, I thought then after my heart attack is hold on a second. I think that checking my emails on my own time is relaxing because I'm getting caught up on work. So I changed that mindset to hold on, no, no, no. I'm going to put the computer down during that hour. I'm either going to sleep or I'm going to meditate or I'm going to do some journaling. And that's when I've always been a journaler. I think that's probably also part of my writing background, even since a kid. I still have my diaries, those diaries that have like the lock on them. I still have them from
oh,
back
I
in the day.
love that.
I do. And so I started journaling a lot more on the train and it started to release that stress. It started to put me in a different mindset going to work and home. And I think that was one of the biggest changes I made. Then
Yeah.
ultimately after that, my husband got a job offer in Denver, Colorado. So then a
Mm.
year later, we ended up moving to the States,
No more
and
commute.
no more commute, but also moving to Colorado has been a godsend because it's also a place of health and wellness and, the
Yeah.
mountains and,
Yeah.
all that. So I knew that that was going to be a big change in our life. So we decided to do it. So all four of us, my two boys who were young and my husband and I at the time, we moved. And I think that was the biggest change in our lives, but it also helped me. I needed to change. I needed a different environment. I think we all did really, but I think for me physically I did, and it
Yeah.
put me in a different mindset.
Yeah.
And from there, I started to work remotely. Things changed in my career. I started working with people. There wasn't as much stress on me. I mean, there's always stress, but I think the
Mm.
way I managed it became different. And I also, emotionally and even spiritually, I started to look after myself in a little bit of a different way, being in Colorado and being in a place where that is very accepted and known. And I started to look at everything in my life different. And that was the biggest turning point for me.
Do you give yourself more grace now?
I do.
Yeah.
I give myself a lot more grace.
Yeah.
I ended up writing all those journals I was telling you about
Yeah.
what I was writing about from a female perspective, as a mom, as a woman, as a career person. All those journalings became my first book. I
Mm.
actually ended up turning them into my book, which I self published, and it's on Amazon now, called My Heart, Myself, a guide for women who do too much, which was
Yeah.
right exactly, of course, what I was going through. And I gave myself grace to be able to share my story. So, talking about storytelling,
Yeah.
I've been in a career where I've always shared other people's voices. I never shared my own story because, through journalism school and growing up, it wasn't really my place to. It
Yeah.
was my job was to share other people's stories.
Yeah.
So I remember, and I tell this story a lot too, is that I was at the time when I had my heart attack and it became kind of public knowledge within my workplace because, of course, people knew what happened. I took some time off for the surgery. And I remember a colleague of mine who worked at Chatelaine magazine, which was a big national magazine, still is the biggest women's one in Canada. And I remember her saying, "You have to share this story about your heart attack in the pages of Chatelaine." And I was like, "Oh God, no." And I'll tell you why I said no. It was because they wanted to feature me in a huge magazine. It was because, one, I had never been featured on my
Mm.
own personal story before, which was very unique. But two, I must admit, and I think a lot of women go through this, when something happens to you physically or even really emotionally or mentally, I felt a lot of shame.
Yeah.
I felt a lot of shame in what happened because I couldn't explain it to people. I felt like I was healthy, but then I had a heart attack. So it was very hard to explain. Two, I also felt like I was a bit of a failure. I had worked in the journalism world in health and fitness and wellness for 10, 15 years. I should have known better about how to treat my body, how to
Yeah.
treat my mind, how to treat my spirit. And I was a walking billboard for that space, and yet I had a heart attack because I was under pressure and I couldn't hold it all together. So it was very
Mm.
interesting. After about 4 to 6 months, she finally convinced me to share my story, and it was the best thing I could have done, and I
Yeah.
still to this day thank her. And her name is Lori Jennings, and she's one of the
We love
editorial.
you, Lori.
I know, and she's funny enough, I'll tell you what, she's the editorial director now at Good Housekeeping in New York.
Is she?
Still, she is, and she's still a good friend. And
Yeah.
she convinced me to share my story. I shared it. It felt like a huge weight off my shoulder, but I
Yeah.
also impacted a lot of people who were readers. I got thousands of letters into the letter to the
Mm.
editor about it, and I
Oh my
then
God.
that was the trajectory to start sharing my story.
Yeah.
So, and then I wrote my book, and then
Yeah.
I started my own women's storytelling platform because I think it's just so important.
So important. I
Yeah,
mean, so important. I feel like there's two ways to influence people. You can put them through an experience and or you can tell them a story. And
exactly,
you, like
exactly.
just put them there. Let and with that vulnerability, then nobody's perfect.
Yeah,
We're all striving for excellence, and there's like millions of women that are living just like you, and who would know? Who would know these things? I can relate
yeah,
when you said the amount of stress. When I did my first Tony Robbins event, and I was in this room with all these platinum partners, and I thought that I was doing it really big, Carrie. I think, I was making $500,000 a year, and I thought this stress, my ears were up to here. I mean, my shoulders were up to my ears in stress. And I just thought that it came with the territory.
that's it.
And I
That's
walk
exactly
into
it.
this room with all these Tony Robbins platinum partners, and they're multi
Yeah,
millionaires, and
yeah,
they're having fun, and
yeah.
like and they look carefree, and you can just, and I was like, I got something majorly wrong here. Like I'm doing something so wrong. But I didn't know. I didn't know. And that could have happened to me. I mean, heck, maybe it did. And I just don't know it. And so many other women. But being the, the number one cause of death for women, I want to get your story out there to so many people who are on this rat race, who put so much pressure
Yes,
on ourselves, who need to learn how to have grace and put the structure in place. Because usually what happens is an incident like this happens, and we go, oh gosh, okay, I'm listening. If you believe in a higher power, I'm listening. Okay, I'm going to do these things. And you write it down. And then like 3 weeks later, you're like, wait, oh yeah, no, I'm good.
I
I'm
know.
good. We're gonna go right back to it. But you made a conscious shift and you
I
changed your
did.
life. Yeah.
I did, but I tell you what though, and I'm being honest, is that
Yeah.
I still have to remind myself every day to
We
slow
do.
down.
Yes.
Right? Like I might speak on this and I might
Yeah.
encourage other people to slow down. And these are the signs and symptoms that I felt personally. And, if you experience any of these, please take a moment to yourself and think about your health, because your health is your wealth, right? At the end of the day. But I
Yeah.
still have to remind myself all
Yeah.
the time. And so when I wrote my book, it's funny, it's a very small book, it's a short book, it's an easy read, but it's something to just, I read it all the time. It's something to remind myself of, I went through this, and oh yeah, I remember now that why this all happened, because I
Yeah.
didn't take a check-in with myself. I didn't sit down with myself and really digest what I'm going through, to
Yeah.
be grateful, to have gratitude, and to also give myself grace. That's a really good way of putting it. I
Yeah.
still have to remind myself nowadays,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things, we don't learn this as women, like
Yeah.
really anyone, men or women, but particularly women growing up. We don't learn to give ourselves grace from a young period, like a young
Mhm.
age. And we also don't learn, especially in college or university, that when you're going after those big careers, or those trajectories of where you want to kind of have your profession, we don't, there's no classes on how to deal with stress. There's no
No. We
classes
need
on
to
how to,
change that. Don't you think we need to change that?
right.
Like,
And that's what I'm
yeah,
working on.
we
Like that,
so
there's
need to
no,
change that.
yes. And
It
there's no classes on how to balance, or at least balance is a hard word, right? But also to have, that space, to give yourself the space to be able to have a career and have a family and all that. There's no classes on that. We all learn that as we go. And I think that's where I try to give back in all of my talks. And I do talk at universities, and I do talk at
I
a
love
lot
it.
of women's events and other events too, about giving yourself that space to be able to accept where you are,
Yeah.
because whatever happens right now is going to be a life lesson to, pass along in the future. So I never take bad experiences as a bad experience. They really are just something that can help us and further our message forward.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for being so real. I really,
yeah.
I try to find all the real guests and bring them because that's a passion of mine to
Yeah.
show people exactly what it looks like. When I started climbing the ranks in corporate America, it was like the most competitive, male dominated medical device companies. And I chose this, I was the one that was choosing this. But I kept asking people, like, okay, what's this look like? What's this look like? And because we were all competing with each other, nobody would tell the truth. And I'm like, I just want to know what is it like? What does your day look like? What does this look like? And so I really want to give people the real look of what does it really look like? And one of the things that you just said is so important is we have to remind ourselves and we have to have a system of checks and balances because
Yes.
something so bad, you were so close to something terrible happening to you and it didn't and it woke you up. But
Yes.
then you still have all these pathways that are wired in your brain and we got to
Right.
build new ones. And if we're
Right.
not reminding ourselves and that book isn't sitting out as a trigger or a
Right.
note or an alarm on our phone, like to go, okay, hang on a second, Christy, what are you doing? How are you feeling? Do your breathing exercises, get to the sauna. That's what
Yes.
it really looks like, Carrie. I mean, that's it. And how many years later you still have to
Mhm.
remind yourself because we all
Still do.
go back. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's also the way, you go through life, and all those experiences, not only in your work life, but in your personal life, they're all checkpoints, right? They're all different
Yeah.
stages or chapters, as you can call it. But those are the times where I find myself taking a step back again, like
Yeah.
just really
Yeah.
sitting back and going, okay, I'm just going through a divorce right now. So this is a time where I'm really obviously looking at my life, looking at how, I can best
Mhm.
serve, others around me, my children and everything, but also myself. It's another big
Mhm.
checkpoint. My
Yeah.
heart attack was a huge wake up call. That was a checkpoint. Having my children, like again, my oldest is 20 now. I mean, 20 years ago when I had him, that was a checkpoint. It was becoming a
Yeah.
mother. All
Yeah.
these different
Yeah.
stages of our lives, and there's going to be so many more in my life. Those are great times to be able to sit back and say, okay, take, the checks and balances, like you said, look at your life, look at how you're leading it, but where you want to go, but also how you're leading your current present day life. And whether,
Yeah.
look at your health, look at all these different things. So yeah, I'm going to constantly be reminding myself about slowing down and making myself a priority, because every single stage is different. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But I'm just mature
It
enough now and
absolutely
experienced to know that.
is.
And that is, again, one of the big messages I like to tell youngsters is about, it's okay if you're
Yeah.
not where you are in your career right now at 21 years old. It's okay. You have a whole life ahead of you. I think that those are the pressures that, we put on ourselves in college and university.
Yeah.
We have to get
Yeah.
the degree because we have to go make money, and we have to, and it's changing now. That's all changing. So I'm glad to be a
Yeah.
part of that. And I'm so honored, obviously, for you to help let me share that story, because it's so important to get it out to the
Of
masses.
course.
So,
Yeah, of course. Now in your book, you have some warning signs for women
mhm.
of,
Yeah.
if they're moving too hard, right? If they're heading towards potentially the same place that you are. Are you comfortable sharing a few of those warning signs for women that will kind of wake them up and go, okay, here's a few things that go, okay, I'm trending in the wrong direction. The 10 signs that you need to slow down, I think is what you call it.
That's what it is. I do have the 10 signs you need to slow down. And,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. I've always been a people pleaser. I think that's another thing. I've always been a people
Yeah.
pleaser. I'm an
Yeah.
empath. I'm a Libra. I'm the person that likes to balance everyone out. If there's an argument, I'm always in the middle, trying to
Mhm.
kind of maybe take two sides. I like to look at two sides. But I also think that's where my journalist comes in, right? Because I'm always being objective. I'm always looking at both sides and trying to share those messages. The 10 signs to slow down really came from my own experience after the heart attack. And one of those is really looking at your exhaustion. If you are
Yeah.
exhausted, like, and I'm no doctor, so I can't say that if you're exhausted, you're going to have a heart attack, because there's many, 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 many things that could lead to exhaustion. But what I'm saying from my
Yeah.
personal experience is that, I was more exhausted at the evenings at that time leading up to my heart incident than normal. And I didn't understand it at the time. I was like, I know I'm working hard. I know I'm commute. I know I have young kids, but for some reason I'm physically exhausted and falling into bed way earlier than I normally would. That was interesting. Another thing, that one of the signs was headaches. I kind of have always been prone to have migraines under stressful situations, but I do remember having them more frequently and for more longer periods of time during that couple of months leading up as well. That was another kind of sign that, when I look back now, I thought I should have went now and talked to my doctor, is what I should have done. All those different things, really. I also had a lot more heart palpitations. I had a lot more, skipped beats, all these things that I guess at the time I thought, well, I'm just stressed. But at the time, I should have recognized that. I think that, having a heart defect and a heart, condition since birth, obviously that was always there, but I didn't realize how
Mhm.
much more and more it was becoming more evident. So for me personally, that was another sign and symptom that I should have looked into earlier. And that's why in my book too, I talk about all those things about how you can relieve and slow down and take that pressure off yourself. Like, learning to say no is one of them. I know that people say that all the time, but it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to say than, said than done. And that was one of the things I
Yeah.
had to learn to do.
So how'd
So
you learn how to do that?
yeah, and I still, again, still
Yeah.
practicing it now, but
It's
I
interesting for
learned.
me, I do the Today Show a few times a month here in Charlotte, and it's
Yeah.
interesting what I found. I did a segment on this last year,
Okay.
giving people the words. Like, how do you get out of your situations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's difficult because,
Yeah.
as a people pleaser, as a person who likes to give and serve people, and who doesn't want people to like you, right? You don't want to feel like you're disappointing people, right? When you say no, or when you say, I really can't fit that into my schedule. I think, though, after my heart attack, I learned to say no simply out of necessity. I learned to, because I was giving of myself too much to other people. And I certainly still do that now, but I did have to set those boundaries. And I didn't even know what that was called, right? The
Yeah.
boundaries. I didn't
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
then what that
Yeah.
was.
You're just like, I
But
gotta
I
get out of
learned,
this. I can't
I
do
know.
this.
I really explained at that time. I could start to do it by basically saying, look, I've had some heart issues, so I have to kind of, slow down. But now I'm past that. And now I learn to say no by, knowing that I am going to be better off serving the people I love and the people at, even my work and what I do and what I produce on the day to day. If I say
Yeah.
no to such and such a things, the leading up to that, because I know that it's going to drain me. I know that it's going to take my mind off of things that I should be doing, my priorities or my children, because when I take my mind off of those priorities that are important to me in my own personal life, I become grumpier. I become not the person I want to be. So I then backtracked that and said, you know what? I then have to say no to going out to this certain person for now, and I'll go out with you next week. But right now, I have a deadline coming up. I'm going to have to say no, and it really has served me better in the long run. And it's something I've had to learn, to be
Yeah,
honest.
but again, there's so much wisdom in what you said, that you recognize the behaviors that you would notice in yourself, the grumpiness, and you could roll that back and go, okay, the reason I'm feeling this way is because I'm stretched too thin, and I'm trying to do everything, but the people that matter most and the things that matter most are suffering. And at the end of the day, there's only so many hours. There's only so much gas in the tank.
There is. I know.
Yeah.
And I like to, I, it's so funny now in my presentations and when I go around speaking at masterminds and events, I always kind of equate it to like, all have cell phones now, right? Like often we have to think
Yep.
about, charging our cell
This is all
phone,
I
and
got. This is all I
it's,
got, right?
it's all you
Yeah.
got. You gotta fill up that tank. Like you
Yeah.
said, you have to fill it up. And, who wouldn't think to charge their phone overnight because they know they need it for the next day? So
Yeah.
apply that to yourself. Think
Yeah.
about your health. Think about recharging yourself, whether it's getting to bed earlier, whether it's saying, you know what, I know I love my Netflix series and stuff like that, but it's going to be there tomorrow. I should get some extra sleep tonight. Do it. Sometimes the binging is also a stress relief, but think about what you're taking away when you binge on TV. You might be staying up way later at night and taking away the sleep that you need for the next day to be productive or be happy for your family. So think about those things, weigh the pros and the cons, and that's what I've had to do and I still do
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. To me, that's what balance is
It
first and
is.
foremost identifying what's most important. And if you just focus on those things, you can probably have it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean the buzzword now is harmony, right? Like I've interviewed lots of
Mm,
experts in we just published our digital magazine, and the whole topic and the theme of it was work life harmony, because a
mm.
lot of people are using that. Balance is very difficult to do. I know it's easier, you balance things because it goes up and down, right? Like it's a cycle. But with harmony, you can have harmony do that, and you can be consistent with harmony, because harmony is really the ebbs and flows of your day to
Ooh, I
day.
love
And I
that.
think that's really important to keep in mind, that, everybody's days go up and down. And I think if we can accept that, and again, to your point, give yourself grace, I think
Yeah.
that's where we're going to benefit from it the most.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna borrow that word from you. I like that, harmony. So, authenticity is attached to you and your brand. And
Yeah.
any place I see you, you're talking about it. People know that about you. How do you balance your desires and your need to find authentic people and authentic stories while being in media? Sometimes those two things I don't feel go together. Did you
They
ever?
don't.
Yeah.
And media has gotten a bad rap. I mean, especially in the last recent years, but also throughout my whole career. Now, I have been fortunate. I've never worked in like hardcore news or those really kind of controversial kind of topics. I've always worked in the lifestyle space, and that was a choice. That's where I wanted to live and to build my career. But it has been difficult, right? Because I'm also, a driver. Like I am a go-getter, if you will,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of competition. So when in more recent years, when I realized that authenticity is so important to me on a personal level, I realized that I could and I should actually start to weave that into my professional life. So when I
Mm.
became the editor in chief of Success Magazine almost like 2 years ago now, and the VP of media, I oversee the Speakers Bureau, our podcast network, I oversee events and all these
Oh,
different
wow.
wonderful media spaces that really are content creators and content creation drivers. And I knew that in order to kind of set myself apart, not just me, but obviously the business in success,
Mm.
to set us apart from those other competitors and those other business and entrepreneurial kind of media spaces and also magazines, I knew that getting to the heart, excuse the pun, but getting to the heart of people's stories and bringing
Yeah.
their authentic story through, and how they built their businesses, how they became a philanthropist, how they became an advocate in a certain space. That's what was going to differentiate us on the business side. So I learned from
Mm.
my personal experiences that I love being around authentic people too. And I love it. And I've grown to even appreciate it more and more as I've gotten older. So
Mm.
I've really learned to dig deep. And when I'm interviewing people for the magazine or for, on the stage in panels, it really is digging into this story behind their story.
Yeah.
I've interviewed so many top people, like at the Tony Robbins. I've interviewed Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, all these different people, amazing people,
Wow.
amazing. And we all know who they are in their public forum, right?
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
Google it now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big thing. You can Google anyone nowadays. You don't really
Yeah.
have to interview them. So if we're going to interview them, you have to get down to the story
Yeah.
and what makes them authentic. And I try to bring that out of them because that's what I resonate with personally. And I'm so fortunate to work in a multimedia company that allows me to do that because
Yeah.
that's what they appreciate from my experience as well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, you definitely stand out.
Thank
That's
you. You're
amazing.
so
Yeah.
sweet.
I
Thank
feel
you.
like the world is ready for it. Do you feel like the world is ready for more
Uh-huh.
authenticity?
I really do, and I'm so excited about 2025 because I know that, like, even just meeting you and being involved in your event and all these amazing things that are coming, very soon, I feel like the world is ready for it. I feel like people are looking for this. I feel like, again, the world of Google, like, we can Google anything.
Yeah.
So why not have those human connections? And I think that what you do on your podcast and sharing, in these events, I think it's just that's the way the world is going to turn from now on because that's what people are really seeking, I think anyway,
Mm,
personally.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so too. So, can you talk a little bit about this new venture of yours and how you
Yeah.
share women's authentic stories? I'm so
Yeah.
excited about this.
Yeah, I'm so excited too. Well, so after my heart attack, and then obviously after I learned to share my story in a public forum and I wrote my book, I got a lot of great feedback from the book. And I self-published it. I'll be honest. I
Mm,
didn't write it to, make $1 million or get on some top list. I wrote it because it was very therapeutic to me as a writer to be
yeah.
able to get my words on paper. And I ended up getting it on Amazon. And you know what? It served me well financially, but also it served a lot of people in sharing my story and people coming to me saying, I wish I had a platform that I could share my story, but I don't really
Mm,
want to write a book and I don't want to
mm,
start a podcast and I don't really know where to go. And you have all this experience in media. So you have the right connections to get your story out there. So that gave me a great idea. I thought, okay, I am going to start a women's storytelling platform, and I've had men contribute to it as well, called redlilylife.com. And on there, I've shared over 1,500 stories. And it is basically a heartfelt blog that I allow people to submit their stories. I personally go through them and I get them out there in the way that they want to be heard. It's
mm,
very lightly edited because I want their authentic voice to come through. And I just do it and they can share their story for free and people have gravitated towards it. So what I plan to do in the future, and I'm working on it now behind the scenes, is I really want to catapult that platform for people. I want to grow into those spaces where I can help people share their story in other ways outside of on my website, whether they want, advice or guidance or mentorship in that world of media. I am
mhm.
also working on courses. I'm working on a second book. I'm working on all these things that can help people share their story in other ways on a bigger platform so
Yeah.
that they can actually gain whether they want to go on to make it a business, whether they want to just share it for legacy purposes with their family or their circles, or whether they just want to help people like you do with your forums and your messaging just in a natural kind of authentic way. So there's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of really cool things I'm working on right now that will help share those stories. And I hope that, and this isn't just for like professional writers, and this isn't for thought leaders who already have followings. This is the everyday average person who wants to share their story. Those are the people I resonate with. Those are the people in my own personal circles that I want to help get their message across. So I hope that you kind of follow along with me and on Instagram and all these different platforms because I'm going to have so many different ways to be able to do that more and more. Because I do feel like storytelling is also, it's not an avenue to make money only, it's also an avenue to self reflect and give self care to yourself. And it's very
Mm,
therapeutic, I find. That's
mm.
probably the traditional journalist and print journalist in me. I love writing, and I think it's a very, very therapeutic way. So that's kind of what's in the exciting moments and months to come for me. And I hope you follow along.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's something for everybody, if I'm
Mhm.
understanding, right? Because
Yeah.
you can tell your story, but you will have other media services available for my listeners that are breaking out,
Yes.
that do want more coverage, that want to understand how to get themselves in magazines,
Yes.
get more exposure, tell their story in a bigger way, bigger stages, bigger audiences, or if you
Yes.
just want to do it for a therapeutic reason
Hmm.
and let other people learn from your story. Everybody's story, in my opinion, should be told.
Yes.
It's
Agreed.
every
Yeah.
there's at least one person, but I would tell you there's probably 100,000 people that would learn from your story if everybody would just tell it. the way that you feel, the vulnerability, whether it's a relationship, a job, what happened with your mother. I mean, everybody is just waiting for somebody to go, oh my gosh, there's somebody else out there
Yeah,
that feels the way that I feel or that sees things the way that I see it. And then you go, okay. And that gives you a little bit of hope or courage to get out there and do whatever it is that you want to do too. So I love what you're
absolutely.
doing, Carrie. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being here. Thank
Thank
you for agreeing to be on the Success Unleashed Summit in January.
you. Yes.
It is a pleasure to know you, and I look forward to getting to know you even more.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to your event and future things in collaborations as well. So thank you. I appreciate
Yes, you're welcome. All right. We'll see you later.